for today's State Allocation Board meeting is at 3 o'clock, and it will be at the California Department of Education, which is located at 1430 N Street, room 1101. For the funds available from May 2012 to June 2012, we've had a little bit of activity. We've released about $22.2 million in funds. We should see a pretty big spike next month as our accounting team has been processing tons of fund releases for the last priorities and funding round. And for the new construction remaining bond authority, this pie represents new construction funds for Proposition 1D, 55, and 47. Originally, the total allocation was $15.053 billion. Of that, we've apportioned about 96% already, and we have unfunded approvals that represent $225.7 million, and remaining authority of about 2.5%, which is about $378.9 million. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick Asbell to provide some other highlights from today's State Allocation Board meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Wanted to basically throw something up here really quick. Just as a reminder, we do have a priority and funding certification period that's occurring right now. It did begin on July 11, 2012. The filing period does end August 9, 2012. Just as a reminder, those projects that are going to the board today that receive approval for unfunded approvals are also eligible to participate. So kind of keep that in mind. We do need those certifications by 5 p.m. in our office on August 9th, 2012. Also, the certification for this period ends January 8, 2013, so keep that in mind. So we've got a very light agenda, but we wanted to highlight one of the items, and this is in regards to the ORG program. We are bringing forth an item for approval by the board for approximately $36.6 million in unfunded approvals, which is comprised of $34.6 million in ORG funding and approximately $2 million in HPI grants. And if you would look on stamp page 100 of the agenda, you have the kind of the layout of the projects that are going to receive the funding. Now, if this cycle is approved, the remaining funding available for a 10th ORG funding cycle would be approximately $220 million. The final filing date for the 10th funding cycle will be July 31st, 2012. And so now what I'd like to do is hand it over to Ngozi Pruitt, who will speak to site sale proceeds. Just give us a second here. Okay, so in Ngozi's absence right now, what I'll do is I'll get started on this, and then when she gets here, she can continue forward. So one of the things that we've gotten recently are a lot of requests in regards to if you have surplus property, and if you turn around and you sell it, what are the options? What can you do with that particular property? And there is a mechanism in statute that allows a district, if they bought surplus property with their own funds, to be able to deposit those proceeds into the general fund. And basically this is tied to Education Code Section 17463.7. Now, just a quick overview of this particular ed code. It does authorize school districts that meets the requirements, to deposit the proceeds of the site sale proceeds with personal property located on that property. The one caveat with this is it must be purchased entirely with local funds. So if there's any kind of state contribution in relation to the land or the personal property that's on that particular item, then you can't use this particular education code. So the purpose behind this is when you use the proceeds, it can only be used for one-time general fund purposes. And as far as the statute, it did sunset on July 28, 2009, but now it's become effective again with January 2014. School districts must submit the following when they're trying to get or use this particular statute. Basically, you have to send a letter to the executive officer of the OPSC. There must be a school board resolution basically discussing the fact that they can't be for one-time, or there has to be for one-time expenditures. They also must certify to the SAB that they have no deferred maintenance needs, can't violate any provisions of any local bond act. The real property is not suitable to meet projected school construction needs for the next 10 years. Once again, we talk about the fact that it has to be purchased entirely with local funds, must be for a one-time general fund purpose. The school district acknowledges that it will not be eligible for deferred maintenance for 5 years. And they also acknowledge that if they come in for financial hardship, there'll be a reduction to their particular funding. Also, we need some information as it relates to the original purchase price, the number of acres, and so forth, and that would be sent to OPSC. Also need the number of acres being sold from the site. And then it must be presented prior to the SAB before you transfer something into the general fund. And that's very important because if you move that money over and the SAB is not apprised of this, you could actually jump the gun. You may not meet the certifications or the provisions of the education code. Once we get that information, we review it. Anything that's incomplete, we'll ask for additional information. We'll contact the district. We'll give them time. Complete packages will be processed and submitted to the SAB at the next available board meeting. Now, Nungazi is the point of contact for this, and Jesse Mendez is also a point of contact. So if you have any questions in regards to this, they would be the people to talk to. And so are there any questions as it relates to the site sale proceeds? Okay, I will now turn it over to Dennis Schrader, who will do the prevailing wage monitoring.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Schrader, and I'm currently a member of the communications team and also a project manager for Region 3. If you have any questions, you can call me at 916-375-4988. So on December 14th, 2011, the State Allocation Board approved amendments to the school facility program, which put the prevailing wage monitoring grant into effect. On March 26, 2012, the amended regulations became effective, authorizing the board to provide the new prevailing wage monitoring grant for all school facility projects with the construction contract awarded after January 1st, 2012, regardless of the bond source. And this is actually specified in Senate Bill SBX 29, Padilla, and Assembly Bill 436, or AB 436, Solorio. The PWM grant, it's intended to assist districts and COEs in covering the DIR fee. The DIR fee is capped at 1/4 of 1% of the total state bond proceeds. Currently, staff is providing the PWM increases for projects that received apportionments on December 14th, 2011 and March 28th, 2012. We want to assure that the projects receive the PWM grant for contracts awarded on and after January 1st, 2012. So if the contract award date is prior to January 1st and the projects are funded from Prop 47 or 55, the project would fall under the old labor compliance program requirements. What we require from the districts or the COEs is we require an updated application for funding, SAB 5004 form, or an SAB 5010 form for the CTE projects. Also, a copy of the Public Works contract or the PWC 100. And the district or the COE, they can actually provide a screenshot of this form, or they can fax in the form, and the URL is actually provided on the actual presentation. So DIR, or the Department of Industrial Relations, has a special unit, the Compliance Monitoring Unit, and they receive the required PWC 100 form from the districts for any of the state bonded projects. Projects that are not on the priority and funding round list, but they're awarded the PWM grant adjustments, they're required to submit a fund release authorization, the SAB 5005 form, within 18 months. Projects that are on the PIF or the priority and funding round, and they actually have the apportionments, they have a 90-day requirement. So the new part that's been added to this form is Section 17. Section 16 is basically what it used to be. So we're looking for the contract award date, and so Section 16 will show the notice to proceed. And Section 17, as you can see, there's the new section with the DIR CMU administered, the DIR approved district LCP, or the collective bargaining agreement pursuant to Labor Code Section 1771.3B3. This is a copy of the PWC 100 form, and basically there's the project information, the location of the public works site, and also the project dates. So you can see on the form there's actually the contract award date, and that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the entire form, but mainly that. If the first contract award date is on or after January 1st, 2012, and the district will list TBD in the form itself, they'll actually receive the new PWM grant. So the total projected bond apportionment, it's a term defined in the new regulations, and it's equal to the sum of the base grant and all additional grants included in the state share, plus any financial hardship amounts. So this just kind of breaks it down. So the prevailing wage monitoring grant is 1/4% of the total state bond proceeds. So as you can see, the state share, if it was $1,500,000 and we're looking at a new construction project, you would take that times the 1%, which equals $15,000. Take the 15,000 times 0.25, that gives you 3,750. And it's a 50-50 project, so you divide that or times that by 50%, you get $1,875. And then if it was a 60-40 project, you're going to do the same thing, but once you get your figure, just times that by the 60%, and then also times that by the 40%. Financial hardship, it would be the state share plus the financial hardship amount. So as you can see on the right, if you had a $3 million project with the state share, and then you add $2,800,000 with the financial hardship, you would add the two, and then times that by your 1%, and then you would times that by your 0.25. And one of my friends who's a mathematician, he pointed out that you could take the state share times 0.0025 for the quick calculation. So that would actually give you what the total prevailing wage monitoring grant is, and then you could times that by the 50%. This just kind of shows, again, if it's a new construction, non-financial hardship, you can take the state share times 1.0025, and that's going to give you your total. So it'll have the PWM grant included. And then you just check your work. If you come up within $1, it's probably because of rounding, so it'd be a good a good, accurate figure. Next slide just shows the modernization financial hardship. And so basically it's just added the same thing, the state share, plus the financial hardship. You times that by the 0.0025. Because it's a 60-40 project, you could take that amount times the 60%, which would give you the 1,071. Or you can also take that times the 40%, so you know what the district's portion was. And next slide, it just shows the same thing. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, next we have the State Allocation Board Implementation Committee meeting of July 12th, 2012. Bill Savage will present.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. So I want to just take you through our last meeting of the Implementation Committee of the State Allocation Board on July 12th. We looked at two different topics that are ongoing topics, including one of our staff and public community favorites, the Project Information Worksheet. So we'll start by going through what was we talked about first, which is the K-8 MEF regulations based upon the Sequoia Union appeal that the board heard earlier this year, and talk about that first. This was our second meeting discussing this issue where a district had come forward with a project that proposed to use a use of grants to build a combination or hybrid facility, a multi-purpose and gym. And the board actually granted their appeal, but asked the staff to take this back to the implementation committee and review how we could provide that flexibility for school districts in some of the unique situations that we find in schools throughout California right now. So at this point, in our last meeting, staff presented some considerations about which type of facilities would be eligible. So clearly middle schools, high schools, multi-level schools like K-8s or K-12s, but not elementary schools where you don't have a requirement for a gymnasium, although every elementary school that I ever served as a facilities director would die to have a gymnasium. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So staff asked the question, are there any other combinations that we can think of? And, there were people thought, well, there may be combinations, but in most of them, you'll have walls that would divide the spaces. So a library that's sharing space with a gym, obviously you're going to have walls there because you don't want basketballs bouncing through the stacks. No, just kidding. So I want to keep us on the higher level here. So what are the criteria? That's what staff looked at next. And how does OPSC calculate the funding allowances for these new types of facilities? So we used the current table, which is shown on the screen, and I'm sure everybody can read that in the back. But it is available on the internet, and you can get the webcast of this presentation, so if you need to look at these. But this is the table that OPSC uses as part of the use of grants calculation to look at the square footages that are allowable that can be funded under the program for the different types of facilities. So after a discussion of how this table works with the implementation committee, staff then presented a proposed amended portion for the table, which would then identify a hybrid facility, multi-purpose room gymnasium that might include food service, shower locker, and staff took some basic numbers for square footages. As you see on the screen, 12.9 square feet per pupil is really the same square footage as the gym size in the existing table. But what the staff said is, look, this is really a placeholder. Let's discuss with CDE and with all the stakeholders what is the right square footage that we want to use as we develop this. And so that was what a lot of the discussion was focused on after that. So the comments from the implementation committee, from the stakeholders, were very supportive providing additional flexibility for districts. I think it's really clear that throughout the state of California, K-8 facilities are, and taking an elementary school and converting it to a K-8, it's one of the most common things that happens in a school district, responding often to neighborhood concerns that they want kids to stay in a smaller environment, typically closer to home, that kind of thing. So districts are often scrambling to provide adequate facilities because when you have an elementary school and you add 7-8 curriculum, all of a sudden you don't have a gym to provide PE, you don't have a band space, and you don't have science classrooms. So these are the kinds of things that go through the minds of school district facility directors as they work within the program. So the next steps, work with CDE to confirm the allowances for square footages. And as usual, we certainly get a lot of feedback from stakeholders at the IMP committee about their concerns. And one of the concern areas that we heard related to this item was, are the OPSC square footage numbers in the table and the 60% adequacy calculations, are those limiting districts in some way? And we had some good discussion of that with the stakeholders at the meeting. Okay, this is my favorite #1 topic of discussion, the project information worksheet. We've been working on this, Brian, how long have we been working on this one this year? Since January, I think. So we continue to try and find ways to work with stakeholders and with OPSC staff to the 3 items that the board asked us to complete at their January 2012 meeting, to streamline the process of filling out the form, streamline the questions, really hone it down, reduce the number of submittals, and collect data on other programs in the school facilities program. This is a summary of programs that currently require the PIW to be submitted by school districts at the top, and those that are not required to be submitted. So if you're in a modernization program, you're getting modernization funding, you're not required to submit the PIW unless you have an HPI, a high performance incentive grant, and then you're required just to fill out that section. So from a kind of big picture standpoint, in the state of California, we're collecting data about one type of projects, and we have a void in a whole other type of projects that we'd have no additional information from districts about what is happening, what the true costs are, and what the scope is. So I think that this is an endeavor that's long overdue, frankly, in terms of the state of California having data to get things from school districts on the PIW that the state does not currently have. And if you think about the PIW and what it does now, it provides some key elements that the state of California does not have or has in estimated or abbreviated forms. And the #1 item is, what was the true project cost for this project? Because districts are not required ever to submit that total amount any other place than in the PIW. When they submit their project expenditures under the detailed list of project expenditures, it's often the case that districts will submit just the expenditures that make up their match to the state to meet the legal requirements. They don't necessarily, some districts do, but not all, put what the true cost of the project is. And so I'm going through this long discussion about this because I do think it's important information for the state to have, and it's actually extremely important for school districts if they want the state to understand how much does it cost to build a school in California. That's the fundamental question that we're trying to answer with the PIW. And so if you look at modernization, how much does it cost to modernize a school? Seems like an easy question, right? Wrong. So a lot of the discussion at our meeting was trying to make sense out of the complexity of going to another program like modernization. But before we got there, part of the beauty of the implementation committee is that all the stakeholders get a chance to tell us what they think. And a lot of them didn't think a whole lot of this idea. At least in this meeting, we had about, an hour of discussion, I'd say in the beginning, about concerns that districts had and stakeholders had regarding adding additional programs when we haven't finished streamlining the existing PIW and completing the improvements of the existing PIW. Concerns about workload, discussions on how the information would be used, and then we finally got over that hump and spent the rest of the meeting talking about specific issues related to modernization data collection. You know, when you modernize a school, the fundamental issues are quite different from project to project, and they're extremely difficult to compare one modernization to another. And the element that defines the work is, what is the scope? What are you doing specifically to that building? When you have a new construction project, right, you're building a school. Pretty easy to figure out what the scope is. Obviously, there's differences in quality level and completeness, etc. But with modernization, you've got an existing building with some conditions in it that you're applying a certain amount of money to. And so if the condition of the existing building is good, the result will be even better. If the condition of the building is poor, the result will be different in terms of the qualitative condition of the school. And so it's a somewhat complex data question, frankly, to answer. And we talked a lot about the age of the buildings and the need also to understand some of the broad categories of work that districts do, which I know OPSC staff is very familiar with. For example, ADA compliance and that kind of the work that we provide additional grants for example, in the school facilities program. So scope of work. How do we do this? And remember, as a background here, what staff was working with and we're all trying to work with is collect data in the context of wherever we already have data in the state. So for example, if we already collect information about a modernization project on the 5004 or the 5005, that data can be auto-populated into the PIW and as a direct data dump so that we remove a step from school districts, and frankly, it provides an extra layer of certainty regarding the quality of the data. I mean, if we're talking about analyzing data, we know that this data is good. We pop it into the PIW. The district doesn't have to do it. That's a step saved for all of us, especially when we look at the validity of the overall data. So here's a list of some of the things that we talked about, and there's another list on the second page. But clearly, we want to know not just the school site and the county and all the locations. We want to know the building where the work was performed. We want to know the age of the building. We want to know site areas that were modernized. We want to know the overall cost of the work, as I talked about before. We spent a lot of time talking about, and we're going to probably spend more time talking about, what level of detail for cost do we want? So I'm imagining, for example, that OPSC would probably want us to collect cost data where they provide additional grants so that you could make a comparison of actual cost to grant amounts provided. Just as an example, ADA compliance comes to mind. But there's a level of detail there that's somewhat complex, and there's the comparison issues between what the district might report and what the state might fund. These are issues that we're going to have to wrestle with as we go forward in considering using modernization data. Here's a kind of summary list also that came out at the end of the meeting. Infrastructure work, hazardous materials abatement, whether they were permanent or portable buildings modernized, like-in-kind replacement. Like-in-kind replacement of buildings in California, as the building stock that we have in the state ages, it's becoming a much more common approach to modernization because the community, frankly, when they see a modernized building as really a new building, they're much more, they see that they've gotten more bang for their buck, they've gotten a better facility than they do sometimes when you modernize an older building and can't make that much of a difference in how it looks or feels. So that's an added cost element, and sometimes there's added area that goes with that. We want to know the classrooms, the number of classrooms modernized. So for example, right now, staff puts together the charts that go with the state allocation board packet every month, and so a typical chart will show, you know, number of spaces built, etc. So for modernization, we'll presumably want to know, as we're ongoing from a bond accountability standpoint, what was the number of classrooms that we modernized over X period in the state of California using state and local bond funds. We want to know the number of pupils served in the modernized spaces. These all seem basic, but it's all part of setting up and considering whether we can use some of the existing input areas in the PIW or whether we need to modify them for modernization. And also a final note is, and clearly there's a lot of judgment calls here, but we probably want to have some kind of qualitative index of what the modernized condition of the building is. And so we have a lot of work to do to make this successful, but I think that staff got a good set of parameters, and we're going to take this back to the M Committee. Our next meeting is August 10th, 2012, and we're back on Fridays and going forward, and we'll have some preliminary proposals from staff at our next meeting, and look forward to seeing everybody there. So who's up next? Sue? No? Oh, CDE. Excellent.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael O'Neill from the School Facilities and Transportation Services Division at the Department of Ed. And I have 4 topics to cover today, 3 pieces of legislation of note. But first, I'd like to cover the acceptance of a new report by the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. Last year, the Department of Ed commissioned the UC Berkeley Center for Cities and Schools to prepare a policy research report led by Dr. Jeff Vincent and others, who then conducted extensive research analysis and stakeholder interviews, as well as an investigation of other state-level school facility policies nationwide. And that report was generally to address 3 questions. 1, how can the state better promote efficient and sound planning for K-12 school facilities? 2, how should the next generation of the state's K-12 school facilities be prioritized? And 3, what policy and regulatory changes are needed to support sound planning and strategic prioritization of state funds? Now, CDE is pleased to announce today that the report titled California's K-12 Educational Infrastructure Investments, Leveraging the State's Role for Quality School Facilities in Sustainable Communities, depending on what time it is or was accepted this morning by our superintendent at a press conference in Oakland. Now, the full report and an executive summary are available as of right now via a link on the CDE webpage under What's New. At the direction of the superintendent, CDE will be reviewing the report's recommendations, the implications of those recommendations, and the feasibility of them. And the superintendent and CDE staff will also be working with the affected agencies and stakeholders concerning implementation, which will also be part of any future bond or new funding program discussions. CDE will also be conducting a webinar to be held in the next couple of weeks. The date will be announced soon. It may or may not be around August 7th, to go over the report in depth. And we'll also be conducting a detailed briefing at the fall conference for CASH. The findings of the report address 4 major areas or challenges. They call them challenge areas, and that has to do with planning, management, funding, and accountability. There are 8 major recommendation areas that re-envision the state's role in K-12 infrastructure to appropriately support educational outcomes and contribute to sustainable communities through public infrastructure best practices of sound planning, effective management, adequate and equitable funding, and appropriate oversight. I'm not going to read to you the major recommendations or the many sub-recommendations, but I encourage you to read the 85-page report and the detailed recommendations. I think you'll find the information in there as well as the recommendations very interesting. And any questions about the report should be directed to Kathleen Moore, the Director of the School Facilities and Transportation Services Division. Next up, some legislation of note. The first piece is SB 1016, which was a committee omnibus bill was signed into law on June 27th and became effective immediately. And this deals with a number of issues, including changes to the Ed Code for sale and lease of surplus school sites. Of particular note is that any real property designed to provide direct instruction or instructional support identified by a school district as surplus property after July 1st, 2012, must first be offered to a charter school if that charter school has first submitted a written request to the school district to be notified of such surplus property offerings. Now, there are also many other certain conditions that apply to charter use of such surplus property and other provisions regarding failure to comply with these provisions. Also, this section of the bill dealing with the charter use is only operational for 1 year unless it is extended by further action. If you have questions about this particular bill and its implementation, contact Lisa Olakoya in our office with any questions on that. The second bill of interest is AB 1199 by Brownlee. This was signed by the governor on July 10th, and it does not become effective until January 1st, 2013. And this bill changes the maximum number of terms a member of a citizens oversight committee may serve without a waiver being provided by the State Board of Education. And that changes it from the maximum term from 2 to 3 terms. And these terms must be at least 2 years in length, each term. This bill should reduce the need for many school districts to continuously seek waivers from the State Board of Education on the maximum number of terms. And it should add some continuity to bond oversight committees. The last piece of legislation is that funding for transitional kindergarten was provided in the final state budget. And if you remember, transitional K allows a district to phase in this program over 3 years based upon the date of birth of a child. And a child is eligible for transitional K if their 5th birthday falls between the dates listed here for the following school years, each year pushing the date back 1 month. As I understand the bill, the districts can also make the jump in fewer numbers of years. Some frequently asked questions regarding transitional K are, can transitional K and K students be enrolled in the same classroom? The answer is yes. Although the intent of the law is to provide separate and unique experiences, districts do have the flexibility to determine how to best meet the curricular needs of each student. Another frequently asked question may be, what type of facility shall be used for transitional K? They are the same as presently exist for kindergarten. For example, the Title V minimum requirement of 1,350 square feet, including all of the areas, teacher preparation, workrooms, etc. Toilets either in the classroom or within the K complex would apply, supervision of the play area, etc. Other frequently asked questions and their answers are available on the CDE webpage. And for more information, you can also contact Mary Autry at CDE at the information listed here regarding implementation of that program. And questions about the effects upon SFP eligibility, I would direct to the Office of Public School Construction on how they're going to count enrollment or how that would affect projections, etc. And finally, just by way of note, a field rep or consultant position within the School Facilities and Transportation Services Division was posted yesterday. This will fill an open position in the Policy and Standards Unit, and part of their responsibilities would be to lead the Green Ribbons School Award Program. And if you're for further information about that posting in our office, you can contact Jeffrey Thorne, and you can find him listed on the posting as well as our webpage. Any questions regarding information for CDE? Great, thank you.
That concludes our presentations for today. We'll see you at the board later this afternoon. Thank you.